The first time I heard them, I thought the ocean was screaming. It was a Thursday night, calm, black water stretching in every direction, the moon hanging low and swollen over the horizon. The kind of night sailors dream about, when the wind is steady and the sea behaves like it's half asleep. But then the sound came. It didn't start loud. It seeped in like a whisper you're not meant to hear, curling over the waves and finding its way into my ears. A long, drawn-out howl, too deep for a gull, too sharp for a wolf. It was something in between, twisted and wrong. And it was moving. One moment, it came from far off the port side. The next, it rose from the darkness off the starboard bow. It circled us, threading through the wind like a voice that knew exactly where you were. I gripped the railing without realizing it, my knuckles whitening against the salt wet wood. The ocean stretched empty before me, but the sound was close enough to feel in my chest. Then, I heard the breathing. Slow, vet, heavy, coming from just below where I stood. I leaned over the bow, my heartbeat loud enough to drown out the creak of the ship's timbers. The water below reflected my face, pale, wide-eyed, until it didn't. For a split second, my reflection smiled. I stumbled back, boots scraping across the deck, but there was nothing there. No ripples, no shape in the water, just the darkness and the wind. I didn't know it then, but most men who hear the night howlers never live long enough to hear them a second time. And for the unlucky few who do, the sound follows them forever. They call this stretch of water the Black Current. You won't find it on official charts, not under that name, anyway. To the shipping companies, it's just another part of the northern trade route. But to sailors who've worked these waters long enough, the name means something. It means trouble. It's a channel where the sea seems heavier. The water's darker, the waves slower, as if something is dragging at them from below. Compasses twitchier. Storms roll in without warning. And if you believe the old stories, ships vanish, swallowed without a trace. I crossed it once before, years ago. Back then, I didn't hear the howls. I thought the stories were just the kind of talk you get anywhere sailors gather and drink too much. But now, standing on the deck of the Moro's wake, I wasn't so sure. The wake wasn't much to look at. She was an old cargo hauler, retrofitted for deep-sea salvage. Steel hull painted over too many times, decks that groaned underfoot, and an engine that rattled like a smoker's cough. But she was tough, and Captain Braith swore she could take any weather the sea threw at her. There were 13 of us on board, counting the captain. Braith was the kind of man you only had to meet once to understand he didn't believe in luck. Tall, broad, with a beard salted white by the years, his eyes were the color of cold steel. He didn't care for stories or omens or anything he couldn't fix with a wrench or a bullet. Then there was Deke, our engineer. Big hands, always blackened with oil. He had a laugh like a diesel engine, but could go silent for days if something was bothering him. Tom, the cook, claimed he'd been everywhere worth going, though most of us suspected his stories were stitched together from other men's lives. And then there was Rios, the youngest, fresh out of whatever passed for maritime training these days. Nervous eyes, quick with his hands. The kind of kid who wanted to prove himself so badly he'd take risks the rest of us knew better than to try that. I won't name the rest. Not because I've forgotten them, but because remembering hurts in a way I can't explain that we'd been hired to recover cargo from a wreck that had gone down 6 months earlier. A private research vessel that had been carrying something the company wanted back badly enough to pay extra for speed and silence. Braith didn't ask questions. He never did, as long as the pay was good. 2 days out, the water began to change. It's hard to describe if you haven't seen it. The ocean didn't just darken. It deepened, like the color had weight. Even the air felt thicker, colder. We stopped seeing gulls. The sky stayed clear, but the light seemed dimmer somehow, as if the sun was working through a layer of smoke you couldn't see. That's when I started noticing the looks. The way some of the older crew glanced over the rail a little too often or tightened their grip on the ropes when the wind shifted. They knew where we were, and maybe they'd heard it before. That night, the wake crept into the heart of the Black Current. The water slapped softly against the hull. The air was so still you could hear the faint scrape of the anchor chain. I stood my watch with Rios, the kid scanning the horizon like he expected the darkness to bite. Then, there was again. The howl, low at first, almost a moan, rising into something sharp enough to cut through the quiet. Rios froze beside me, eyes wide, head turning slowly as the sound slid from one side of the ship to the other. "You hear that?" I asked. He nodded. Didn't speak. Didn't have to. Because in that moment, the water beside the hull rippled, and something surfaced just long enough for the moonlight to catch on what looked like a slick, barnacle-crusted muzzle. Then it sank back into the black without a sound. The next morning, we were missing a man, Collins. Quiet type. Kept mostly to himself. Spent his off hours smoking on the aft deck. No one saw him after his shift ended the night before. Braith thought maybe he'd gone below to sleep it off. But by mid-morning, when he still hadn't shown for roll call, we started searching. His bunk was empty. No sign of a struggle. His jacket was still hanging from the hook beside his bed. And no man walks out into that cold without a jacket. We swept the decks twice. Nothing. Checked the holds. Nothing. Deke swore he'd heard footsteps above the engine room around 2 in the morning, but when he'd gone to check, the deck was empty. He figured it was just the wood shifting in the cold. Now, maybe not. By noon, the sky had gone flat and gray. The water was choppier, though the wind hadn't picked up. There was a strange smell in the air. Salt, yes, but with something sour underneath, like old blood. That night, I was back on watch. Rios was with me again, though he seemed paler than usual, his hands trembling when he lit his cigarette. We didn't talk much, just stood there, scanning the darkness. Then it came, the howl. But this time, it was closer. It started low and guttural, like something rising from deep under the waves. Then it climbed, twisting into a mournful wail that made the hair along my neck stand up. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was several, a chorus of them, overlapping, circling the ship. Rios muttered something under his breath. Maybe a prayer, maybe just trying to convince himself it wasn't real. And then I saw it, not out in the distance this time, but right alongside the hull. The water broke, and a head surfaced. Long, narrow, covered in slick black fur matted with seaweed. The eyes glowed faintly green in the dark, and its mouth. God, it opened wider than any wolf's should, lined with rows of needle-like teeth that shimmered like wet glass. It didn't growl. It didn't snarl. It just stared at me, and then slipped silently back into the depths. I wanted to call out, but before I could, something heavy thumped against the underside of the hull. Once, twice. The wake rocked slightly, though the water was calm, and then we heard it. A scream, not from the howlers, from below deck. The crew tore through the narrow halls toward the sound, but when we reached the storage compartment, the door was swinging open. Inside, there was nothing but overturned crates and deep, wet claw marks gouged into the metal floor. Braith locked the compartment and ordered everyone topside. But the look in his eyes said it all. Whatever had taken Collins, it was still on board. It didn't like stories. But that night, even he couldn't ignore the way the crew huddled together on deck, avoiding the shadows and glancing over their shoulders like they expected claws to come out of the dark. We'd lost Collins without a trace. Then we'd heard the screams from below. And now the howls were back, rising and falling across the water like voices that had all the time in the world. Tom, our cook, finally broke the silence. "You know what they are, don't you?" No one answered, but a few heads turned. "They're night howlers," Tom said, his voice low, like the words themselves were dangerous. "I heard about him from a dredger out of Gray Harbor years ago. Said they're older than the sea itself. Used to be wolves, not the kind that run on land, the kind that swam." I almost laughed, but Tom's face was too serious for jokes. So long time ago, when ships were made of nothing but wood and rope, a hunting pack ran these waters. Not dogs, not fish, something in between. So they were fast enough to chase down anything, strong enough to tear the hull out of a boat. And smart, smarter than they should have been. They'd howl to drive the crew mad, keep them awake for days. Then, when no one could stand it anymore, they'd come aboard. Deke snorted. "Sea wolves. Sure. And I suppose they walk on 2 legs and play cards, too." But Tom just stared at him. "I'm telling you what I heard. And the dredger said something else, something you ought to take seriously. The only reason anyone knows about him is because they got cursed. Rios shifted uncomfortably beside me. Curse, Tom said. A whaling crew slaughtered a whole pack for sport, strung their bodies along the dock to show off. The story goes, the sea didn't take kindly to that. From then on, the wolves came back wrong. They stopped being flesh, started being something else. The dredgers said they can't die, not the way you'd think. They hunt ships that cross their waters, mark anyone who hears them. You can run, you can hide, won't matter. You've heard him, you belong to him now. The deck was silent. Even the engine noise below seemed quieter. Braith finally shook his head. Old dockside nonsense. The only thing hunting us is bad luck. And I'll not have my crew jumping at shadows. But later that night, I saw him alone by the rail, staring into the dark water like he expected something to stare back. And when the wind shifted, I swear I heard him whisper, not to the crew, not to himself, but to the sea. Not yet. Started with the fog. One moment, the air was clear enough to see a mile in every direction. The next, a thick white wall rolled in from the starboard side, swallowing the horizon like it was never there. It wasn't drifting, it was rushing. By the time Braith barked for the foghorn, we were surrounded. I've sailed through fog before. It muffles sound, makes the world feel smaller. But this wasn't silence. This fog carried the howls. Faint at first, buried in the hiss of the water against the hull, then louder, sharper, circling us like a pack deciding where to strike. I could hear them above me, below me, moving faster than the wake could ever hope to. The first hit came from underneath. A heavy thud against the keel, hard enough to rattle the bolts in the rail. Then another, and another. The whole ship groaned like something enormous was pushing against it. Deke came up from the engine room swearing. Something's fouling the prop. We're losing speed. Braith ordered the nets lowered, thinking maybe we'd snagged a mass of seaweed. But when the crew hauled the first one back up, it wasn't seaweed. It was rope. Thick, frayed, dripping with black water, knotted around what looked like a piece of bone. Too big to be human, too small to be a whale. And carved into it, deep and jagged, was a spiral symbol I'd never seen before. Rios backed away from it like it might bite. That's a mark, he whispered. They've marked us. Before anyone could reply, something slammed against the hull again, higher this time, just below the waterline. Then another impact on the port side, then the starboard, the sound echoing through the metal like drum beats. The fog thickened. Shapes began to move within it. Tall, hunched figures pacing the edges of the deck, vanishing when you turned your head. I caught glimpses of wet fur, glistening teeth, claws that clicked against the steel before retreating into the mist. Then came the first real strike. The port side net jerked violently, nearly pulling 2 men overboard. They scrambled to cut it loose, but before they could, something yanked hard enough to snap the line like thread. The end whipped back, slicing one man's cheek open to the bone. That was when the crew panicked. Orders became shouts, shouts became screams. The deck turned into chaos. Men running for weapons, others locking themselves below. The foghorn bellowed uselessly into the mist. And then, I saw one. It leapt from the water onto the deck, landing on all fours with a wet, cracking thud. Its body was long, too long, ribs showing beneath for slick with seawater. Barnacles clung to its shoulders. Its face was narrow, eyes glowing a sickly green, and when it opened its mouth, I could see rows of teeth stretching so far back into its throat I couldn't see where they ended. It howled, not loud, low, just for me. Before I could move, it turned and bounded back over the rail, vanishing into the fog. It didn't need to kill me. Not yet. They were playing with us. The third night in the black current, the wake was barely holding together, and neither were we. The fog hadn't lifted once. It pressed in on us like a solid wall, dripping cold and heavy, soaking through every layer of clothing until our bones ached. The howls came and went without pattern, sometimes distant, sometimes so close you could feel the vibration in the steel under your boots. No one slept. Every creak of the hull, every splash against the side had men jerking awake with their hands on whatever weapon they'd managed to find. Knives, lengths of pipe, even sharpened bits of metal torn from the cargo crates. By morning, the ship smelled of fear. Stale sweat, unwashed clothes, the sour tang of blood from the man who'd been cut by the snapped net line. It was Tom who broke first. He cornered Braith near the helm, voice shaking. "We have to give him something." "Give what something?" Braith snapped. "The howlers. We got cargo. Food. Supplies. Maybe they'll take it and leave us." Braith's answer was a fist to Tom's jaw. You start thinking like prey, you become prey. But Tom wasn't alone. I saw the looks between him and two other men, whispers in a mess, quick glances toward the lifeboats. They weren't planning to fight their way out. They were planning to leave. That night, the storm it didn't roll in like storms usually do, with a gradual build of wind and cloud. It slammed into us like a wall. One moment, the air was dead still. The next, it was a screaming gale that tore the tarps from the deck and bent the rails inward. The waves rose so high they blotted out the little light left in the sky. In the chaos, we lost another man. Daniels, swept overboard when a wave crashed across the deck. I saw him in the water for a heartbeat, arms thrashing, his mouth open in a scream that was swallowed by the wind. Then something dark surged up behind him, a flash of green eyes, a spray of foam, and he was gone. No one tried to save him. Not because we didn't want to, but because we all knew what had taken him. When the worst of the wind passed, we found the lifeboats missing. 3 of them cut loose. I never saw Tom again. By dawn, there were only 9 of us left. And that's when we realized the storm hadn't blown us out of the black current. It had pushed us deeper in. The fog rolled in faster than I'd ever seen before, swallowing the deck and turning the mast into nothing more than a shadow above us. The salt air turned sour, and I swear I heard breathing in it, low, guttural, and hungry. "We need to move," Merrick whispered, his voice so thin it was almost carried away by the wind. His eyes were locked on the starboard side, though I couldn't see what he saw. I tightened my grip on the rope coiled in my hands. My knuckles were white, but it wasn't from the cold. The ship was creaking, the old timbers groaning, as if something heavy was pressing against the hull. Then, from somewhere deep below, there came a scraping sound. Not the sound of waves or shifting cargo. This was nails, claws, something alive dragging itself along the wood. The crew froze. No one breathed. And then it came, a thud. Heavy, solid, right under our feet. Rafe, the youngest of the deckhands, leaned over the rail to look. What in God's? Something shot up from the black water and caught him by the neck. The thing's skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, its eyes glowing a deep, unnatural yellow. Its jaw unhinged far too wide, and with one sickening snap, Rafe was gone, dragged screaming into the sea. We didn't even have time to react before another shape slammed onto the deck. The same glowing eyes, the same long, twisted limbs. It moved wrong, like a man trying to walk after his bones had been shattered. I saw the ragged remnants of an old ship's uniform hanging from its shoulders, a crewman from the Marrowbane. Merrick shouted for us to run, but there was nowhere to go. Behind us, more of them were climbing aboard, water streaming off their hunched skeletal forms. Each one bore some trace of who they'd been before the curse. A familiar hat, a torn belt, a tattoo, but their faces were hollow, jaws snapping, eyes locked on us like starving dogs. Below deck, Captain Sorrell's voice roared above the chaos. He was already hauling open the hatch. The rest of us bolted, shoving past one another, the wet slap of inhuman feet pounding the deck behind us. I was the last to drop down into the dark hold. As the hatch slammed shut above, I caught a final glimpse of the deck under the moonlight. The cursed crew tearing into the air, their heads snapping toward the sound of our heartbeat. And that's when I realized they weren't chasing us because of hunger. They were following something older, something deeper. The moon itself had them, and it was still rising. The island felt different when I woke the next morning. Not quieter, it was never truly quiet here, but heavier, as if the air itself had thickened, pressing down on my chest with every breath. My dreams had been full of black water and gnashing teeth, but the real nightmare started the moment I opened my eyes. The sand near our camp was churned up, deep grooves carved into it like something had been dragged. The tracks led straight into the jungle, wide, parallel furrows, too deep for human feet. Beside them, streaks of dark, half-dried blood stained the earth. Sloane was gone. Her blanket was still there, her pistol still lying half-buried in the sand. But of her, there was nothing except the faint smell of brine and iron. No one had heard a struggle. No one had seen her leave. The captain said nothing at first. He only crouched by the drag marks, running his fingers through the grooves in the dirt. His knuckles were white. Finally, he said, "It came for her. Same as before. And it'll come again." We argued about following the trail, but the jungle swallowed it quickly. Whatever had taken Sloane moved in ways that weren't meant for human eyes to follow. The foliage was bent in strange angles, leaves curling toward the ground as though recoiling from something foul. By midday, the heat was unbearable. Flies gathered on the edges of the bloody tracks, their droning growing louder than the surf. We moved inland, hacking at the undergrowth, the stink of rot deepening with every step. The trees here were warped, their bark blistered, their roots twisting above the soil like skeletal fingers. It was Harper who found the next sign, a strip of fabric hanging from a low branch. It was Sloane's sleeve, but the fabric was wet, and when I touched it, my fingertips came away slick with something cold. Not water, not blood, something thicker, something that clung to my skin like it wanted to stay there. We burned it. As night fell, the howling began again, but this time it was closer and layered. Multiple voices, some high-pitched and shrill, others deep and guttural, all weaving together into a single monstrous chorus. It didn't sound like wolves anymore. It sounded like something trying to remember how to be human. We kept the fire high. None of us slept. When dawn broke, the captain pulled me aside. His eyes were sunken, his face drawn. "I need you to see something," he said. He led me down to the far side of the beach, where the tide was pulling back. There, tangled in the seaweed and half buried in wet sand, was Sloane, or what was left of her. Her face was still hers, but her body wasn't. The skin had split along her limbs, black fur pushing through. Her hands were gone, replaced by clawed appendages that didn't match each other, one longer than the other, one joint bent the wrong way. Her eyes were open, but they were clouded, the pupils slit like a predator's. The captain knelt beside her, his shadow long in the morning light. "She didn't die," he said. "Not all the way. They're making more of themselves." Before I could respond, Sloane's chest rose, just once, and her head turned toward me. She smiled. The storm had shifted, not in the way a normal squall passes, but as though the sky itself had grown heavier, sinking lower toward the earth. The air was dense with salt and something metallic. The scent of fresh blood carried on every gust. We drifted in the longboat for hours after pushing away from the island's beach. No one spoke much. The survivors sat in silence, staring at the black horizon, as if speaking might draw the attention of whatever still roamed that shore. The only sounds were the slap of the oars and the distant, endless roar of the sea. Carter was at the bow, his eyes fixed on the island until it became nothing but a shadow in the fog. He'd barely spoken since we'd escaped the caves, and when I looked at him, I knew he hadn't left that place entirely. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from what he'd seen. Around midnight, the wind shifted again. It carried a whisper, faint but real, like 100 voices speaking in unison from the direction we'd come. Mine were paused mid-stroke. "You hear that?" I asked. No one answered, but I knew they did. Their eyes told me. The sound grew clearer, though the words were still impossible to make out. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the sea. It was the same sound we'd heard deep in those tunnels, the echo of the cursed crew bound to that island, calling for more.